Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. For today's episode we're going to create a snowy Sakura field in front of a lake. Make sure to download all the necessary assets from the description below. And without further ado, let's begin. As usual, what we want to do is right click on the hierarchy, select 3D object and terrain. Now for this specific scene we don't need a square terrain. We're going to put, for terrain width, to put something like 300 and terrain length something like 500, so it's more of a rectangle. We're going to adjust the speed, size and bending to 0.1 each and the detail distance to 250. Then what we want to do is go on to the paint terrain, change smooth height to paint texture, click on edit terrain layers, add layer, and here what we want to do is add this specific texture. If you don't see it appearing here, then select any other and then select this and change it here. The texture is called snow. Now that we have the texture placed for the base texture of the terrain, we want to create the general layout and shape of the scene. I will want to place a fairly big lake in the middle with a big mountain as a background. Let's start by placing the mountain. Click on the Snow Mountain folder, open the Snow Mountain, prefabs, and drag the Snow Mountain prefab into the scene. Let's try and make it more or less centered. Lower it a little bit, increase the size, maybe to 1.2. Okay, and let's make sure that only the peak, more or less, is visible. Next thing you want to do is select terrain, click on set height, and then flatten this tile to 30. And now what you want to do is select the raise or lower terrain, increase the brush size to something like 250 and lower the overall terrain to the minimum, something like that, and try and leave the part of the terrain closer to you a little bit raised. So let's add the basic shape for the lake. Let's right click in the hierarchy, go on to 3D objects, plane. Let's make this 30 by 100, another rectangle. Let's call it lake, and let's move it near the mountain, something like that, and then adjust the size accordingly so that it doesn't go out of bounds. Let's select it, click on the material and change this to lake and select the R2 lake tasseled. Now that's done, what we want to do is click on the terrain, select the raise or lower terrain tool, reduce the opacity to something like 3 and just adjust the edges so that the lake is actually closed in and it's not just going everywhere. Something like that. Okay. After that, you can reselect the water and readjust the size accordingly. The precise shape of the lake, it's completely up to you. If you want, you can move the terrain a little so that it does cover the whole water, something like that. Press shift and enlarge it like that. Now that's done, what we want to do next is add the basic shape of the river. So we're going to right click on the hierarchy, 3D object, and then create river spline. Let's name this river. Let's click on points, and now to add a point of the river you hold Ctrl and then left mouse button click. So I'm gonna start here, and another one here, 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 and then a last one that finishes in the lake. So I want to increase the width of these points by at least a fair amount. Let's put them to 15, all of them. Now what we want to do is change the material for the river so we can actually see what we're editing. So scroll all the way down to the mesh renderer, click on the material, type river, and then select R2 River Tessel Reflective. Now feel free to choose whichever you like, but I'm going to use this one for this specific video. And now what we want to do is adjust the overall terrain around the river. So let's click on the terrain, adjust the brush size to something like 15, and let's uncover the river like that. Now that it's fully uncovered, what we want to do is increase the brush size by a fair amount, maybe 50, and just raise the overall terrain around the river like this. Do not worry for now if it's not covering it perfectly well. For now, just focus on the environment around it. Now that it has been raised, as you can see, what we'll do is click on the river again and increase the width a little bit more so that it goes past the edges of the terrain. I'm going to put this to 20, 20, 20, 20. Let's select the last point and drag it down. Something like this. Same for the one before last. That. And then remove some of the terrain from it. Alright, let's cover the edges here. We'll probably polish this later on properly, but for now just change raise or lower terrain to smooth height. Select roughly 60, opacity very strong, like 100, and just smooth the overall terrain around the river. Something like that. Okay. Next thing we want to do is add Sakura trees. So we're going to click on the terrain, go on to paint trees, edit trees, add tree, and here we're just going to write Sakura and add all the trees that we want. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to add them all. Alright, now that all trees have been selected, let's adjust the height slightly, so that it does random height more or less between these two values. Click on mass place trees. Let's put something like 1500 and place. Let's erase all the trees from the river, from everywhere else in the lake, and more or less the edges of the terrain. So, you can increase the brush size as much as you need, just to make this process faster. For now this will do. Just decrease it to something like 1 or 2. And remove some of them here. And then add a few, maybe better placed around the edges, like that. Right, now that's done, next thing we want to do is add the bridge. So let's click on the EXR assets, wood bridge, and onto the prefabs with collision, let's drag the wood bridge 1B into the scene, like that. Let's rotate accordingly. Make it so that it starts into the river, like that. And then duplicate it and add as many as you need. I'm going to add 3 for this video. Obviously make sure that it's not floating around, so you can lower it to water level, like that. And then remove the terrain from it. Select 8 and opacity 0.2 and just remove it. No worry, we will cover this properly later on with rocks. Next thing we want to do is click on the Walder Marts, open the Japanese garden package and scroll all the way down to the prefabs and select the Torii. We'll place it right here, increase its size to something like 5, 5 and 5. So make sure that you click on default and then adjust the material here. And adding it to the object. we make it slightly bigger so that it covers the entire width of the river, and make sure it's centered. Right, that's fine. And now what we want to do is add the stone statues. Now, there are no stone statues like that in the Unity Asset Store, so what I did for this specific video is that I simply downloaded the pose from Mixamo, and then I changed the material. So that's exactly what you see right here. This is the pose I downloaded from Mixamo, so it's just imported in Unity. It's called male sitting pose. You can just open it and then change the material of the body. If you select rock, we'll change it to rock 4 or whichever rock you like. So we're going to increase its size to something like 5, raise it accordingly, and we'll place it so that it's sort of leaning onto the structure, like that. And then we'll duplicate it and do exactly the same thing for the other side. Alright, now that the statues have been placed, the only thing that's missing is flowers. So we're going to select the terrain, go on to paint details, edit details, add grass texture, and here we're going to type grass and select the grass flower 10, change the width and height to 0.6, 1 and 0.6, 1.2. And we're going to untick billboard and put the color to something like pinkish or purplish, so that it fits well with the overall scene. If it helps, you can always click a batch and then change the color so you can see what they look like. But for now we're going to do that. We're going to actually increase the height and width a little bit since they are not very visible. So I'm going to put 1.5 and 1.5. That's better. And then we're going to start placing them. Increase the brush size a little, change it, the opacity a little bit lower. Just start placing them everywhere around the river edge. And let's make sure that there are no flowers in the actual river. So while holding shift, you can just check the edges and remove whichever spawned into the river. So next thing we want to do is add a little bit of polish to the light, mood and general vibe of the scene. We're going to start with the fog and Skybox. So we're going to go on Window, Rendering, Lighting, Environment, and change the Skybox by typing Sky and selecting this Skybox right here. It's called just Skybox and it's from the Snow Mountain asset pack. We're going to scroll down, select Fog, change the mode to Linear, going to put it at 0 and 750, and we're going to change the color to something pinkish, not too much, but something that just gives a slight tint to the place. Something also important to do is change the environment lighting from Skybox to Gradient and adjust it manually yourselves. Make sure to choose an overall pinkish tint, the color, the sky color. As for the equator color, I would usually go with something a bit lighter, not too much, maybe in the bluish. And then for the ground color, again, something around purplish. Okay, that already looks a lot better. For the next step, we're going to add some post-processing effects to the camera. So we're going to delete this one here, open the modular first-person controller, and into the first-person controller folder, we're going to drag the prefab right at the beginning of the scene. If you can't see it, just click on the mesh render initially, you'll be able to see it a little bit better. So we're going to drag it up and increase its height to 1.7, rotate it towards the lake. Now, we're going to open the first-person controller, joint, click on the player camera, and add a post-processing behavior, and then add the bloom one. This is one of the presets. You can make your own or you can modify one of these. It's completely up to you. As you can see, the scene already looks a lot better. We're gonna tweak a few things. So we're gonna click on it just to locate it, and then Going to start with ambient occlusion. This is nice, but might be a little bit too much. So I'm going to decrease it to 0.6 and the radius to 1.5. As for the depth of field, you have to check the game. I'm going to place it to 2.4. We're going to untick eye adaptation, tick bloom, which as you can see gives a little bit of shine to the water and the scene, the snow. I'm going to make it not too strong, so something like 0.7. And then as for the color grading, these are the settings that you will want to use. So temperature 3, tint 13. As for the saturation, we're going to increase it slightly to 1.5. So that it has a nice pink vibe to the overall scene. We're going to close the color grading, and vignette will want classic, black, 0.5, 0.5 and 0.3 for the intensity. Next thing we'll want to do is add some snow to the scene, since right now it's really nice but not complete. So we're going to right click on the hierarchy, click on effects, particle system. This should spawn. It's a basic particle system object. The first thing we want to do is change the start speed from 5 to 0. And then add gravity modifier to something like 0.03. So that it pushes them down but very slowly. This is actually probably a bit too slow, so maybe 4. Yep. We're going to increase the lifetime from 5 to 10. So that they last a little longer. Then we want to spread them across the whole area. So we're going to go onto shape and change the shape from a cone to a box. So you can see the collider change to a box. And we're going to make this massive, something like 100, 100, 100. As you can see now, it's going to be spread all across this area. Probably it's going to have to be even bigger. So we're going to make it 200. We're going to keep the Z as 100. But we're going to change the Y to something like 250. Now it's covering a very big area. Let's make sure the snow is not going under the scene. There's no need for that. That's okay. And now we're going to increase the emission by going on to the emission. Rate over time, we're going to increase this to 10,000. And increase the max particle from 1,000 to 10,000. Otherwise, you won't see them. Now, obviously, in a real game, you're gonna have to be concerned with performance. So don't go crazy with the particles unless it's for a cutscene or just a short part of the game. And make sure to disable them after you're done using them. But since this is just a standalone scene, it's fine. I will probably make them a little bit smaller, maybe 0.4. That's better. Next, what we want to do is add some rocks to the scene. I'm not going to place them everywhere, but just around the path of the river a little bit. So I'm going to click on the rocks and boulders, open the rocks folder, prefabs snow, and then start placing some rocks along the path. They don't necessarily have to be too massive, but it's just to add a little bit to the path, which seems a little bit naked right now. So next thing we'll want to do is adjust the directional light, but first let's create a folder called environment, and let's place everything we've done aside from the directional light and first person controller in it, just to organize things a little bit. Now let's click on the directional light. Let's change the color to something a little bit more bluish, just to add some coldness to the scene. I think this will do. Right here. As you can see, the water feels a little bit more blue and the overall scene a little bit more cold. Alright, the scene is looking better and better. Next thing I would want to do is change the water slightly, since right now it seems a little bit too agitated and this scene is supposed to convey, calmness and serenity. So what we want to do is change these settings here for the cascade. We're going to set this to 1, and then this to 10, and this to 10. Alright, now that's done, you can see the water looks a lot more calm and steady. But here, since the terrain is steep, it still looks a little bit foamy. So what we want to do to change that is to adjust the big cascade normal scale and the angle. I'm going to increase the angle quite a bit to something like 45. Now, what I'm going to do here for the next step is adjust the terrain layout slightly so that it doesn't look so steep, but a little bit more leveled. I would like to see the structure from the beginning without the curvature. So I'm just going to spend some time doing that and just skip to the end part. Alright guys, I ended up recreating the environment in a different scene, just to make the terrain a little bit more leveled. As you can see, it's less steep until the very end. So next thing we want to do is right click on the hierarchy, audio source. Let's rename this to music. And in the sounds folder, let's drag the track, which is called Japanese Traditional Music. And let's click on loop. Reduce the volume from 1 to something like 0.75. Alright guys, now that the music has been added, let's add a simple river sound to the scene. So we're going to select the music, simply duplicate it, call it river sound, then adjust the track by selecting the calming stream sound effect, decrease the volume from 0.5 to 0.3, let's decrease the music sound to 0.3 since it was a bit too loud, and the river sound to 0.15, and with that we're done. Let's have a look at the environment.